Hello everyone, and welcome to Module 4. Believe it or not, you are in the last 2 weeks of our course. So Module 4 is pretty much about wrapping everything up and writing your final research plan and your final research paper. So let's look over what you need to do for this module. First of all, take some time to skim and read Chapter 8. Chapter 8 goes over how you write your research paper. And mostly you've already done that. You've already done the first two sections, and now you're writing your last section, which is your research design and methodology. So between Chapter 4, which you read previously, and Chapter 8, you should be in pretty good shape about what you need to do in that last section. There's two discussion threads in this module. The one discussion thread asks you to post your presentation, which we'll talk about in a second. And the other one asks you to think about, now that you've done this research, how will you make use of it? Or how will you encourage your colleagues to maybe do action research of their own to look at an issue that could be improved upon in our school settings? The other major task is to create your final research presentation, which I've tried to break down for you as simple as possible, and we'll get to that in a second, and then submit your final research plan by March 4th. So what do you need to consider when we're talking about the research design and methodology? So your research design and methodology, remember that the goal of this major project is to imagine that you're going to be doing an action research project. It's what you've been building up to this whole time in this course. And so now think about if you were going to actually do a research project, like the ones you probably read about in some of your literature. So if you were going to study the impact of the intervention that you had suggested throughout the course, how would you study that? So for example, Wendy wants to study what's the impact of a freshman academy or a freshman intervention strategy. So she needs to think about how would she study that to gather data about its effectiveness. Or Christy's thinking about what are some differentiation for students of color that could be put in place to help them achieve more success in honors and AP courses. So again, thinking about how could she measure what's the impact of the differentiation strategies that she's recommending be put in place. So for the sake of writing your paper and doing your presentation slides, here's what you need to think about. What is the setting? In most cases, it's going to be your school. So describe your school. Describe who makes it up. Describe why the population that you're studying in your school is important. And describe the context. Although Winters Mill High School might not be your context, but is there a specific section that you're focusing in on? Think about your participants. Who's going to participate in your study, and do they represent a larger population of students, or are you just thinking about that specific group of participants? Think about your research question. You've already thought about that a lot, but what is your research question? What is the question that you're trying to answer by taking some time to do some action research? Then think about the steps for intervention and data collection. What is your intervention? How are you going to put that intervention in place? How are you going to collect data as you go through? What data are you going to collect? And then next, what are you going to do with that data? So once you've thought about those things, you need to do two things with them. The first thing is create a presentation. I try to keep the presentation as brief as possible for you just for the sake of time, but I think it's important that you do it to get some feedback from your colleagues. So I would just suggest like a four-slide presentation, nothing complicated, nothing difficult. PowerPoint or Google Slides is fine. Slide 1, share your research problems and a few specific data reference. Think back to your original memo that you wrote to your principal. So if you already had this, copy and paste it onto this slide. Slide 2, think about your literature review. Your literature reviews are all graded. The ones that have been turned in so far are all graded and returned to you, and they were pretty stellar, mostly just some minor edits to make. But think about the big themes and big ideas that you found in your literature review that you're definitely is going to encourage you in setting up the next step. And then slide 3 is the most important part. Slide 3 and 4 are the most important parts for this next step. Identify your research question. And also think about the setting and the participants that you have proposed to use in your investigation. So going back here, basically we're putting this information onto slide 3. And then on slide 4, outline your research steps and methodologies. And then be sure to include the specific data you're looking to gather. This presentation should be posted by March 1st so that your colleagues can give you some feedback on it in the discussion board, and I encourage you to give feedback to everyone by March 3rd. So try to comment on at least 2 individuals' presentations in the discussion board by March 3rd. Real quick, this is the assignment that I just went over in Module 4, and then there's the rubric for your reference. You don't need to turn this in as you would your other paper. Just go ahead and post it onto the discussion board and I will grade it there. So then the other portion, the other big thing is your paper. And you've already written large parts of your paper. So your paper has 4 sections. The first section is where you state your problem. You introduce the topic. What caused you to come to this investigation in the first place? You've already written this. This is your memo to your principal. So I would just take some time to clean that up a little bit, make some of the edits, take the memo part out of it, and just instead articulate what the research problem is, how it relates to equity, and what is the data that you have that's brought you to there. Again, you should already have this. You should already be ready to go. Part 2 is your literature review. You already wrote this. So make the edits that you feel are necessary. Some of the edits that I suggested, copy and paste that. That's part 2 of your literature review. You don't need to make any more changes. Part 3, the new part, is the research design. So that's what we talked about. So you're just laying out the methodology and the design for your study. You're studying your intervention and how it should work. This should be probably about 4 to 5 pages, but write what you need. Don't write more. Don't worry about the length. I'm not concerned about it being too short or too long. If you're saying what you need to say, that's fine. And then the other thing is make sure that you're following proper APA format, including on your reference page, including your citations. Make sure your paper has all the correct formatting for an APA document, including a title page, page numbers, running head, all of that stuff. Your final paper is due by March 4th at 11:59. Again, here that is in the Module 4 section. There are those 3 sample papers that are referred to before. Feel free to refer to them again. This section just pretty much outlines what I just talked about, and then there's the rubric for it. You will turn it in by submitting the link like you've done for other things. So just real quick, as a quick review, skim Chapter 8, participate in the discussion threads, one of which is your presentation. Work on that presentation and try to post it by March 1st. It can be simple. It doesn't need to be anything complicated. It's just an opportunity for you to get feedback from your peers and your colleagues, and then submit your final research paper by March 4th. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to reach out to me at any point. I will post a link and make myself available in a Google Meet at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, just in case you have any questions. It'll be easier to ask them virtually than instead of emailing, but I look forward to reading your final papers. And again, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope that you all have a great week.